The 8,209th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today's meeting, as far as we are aware, was not planned for and approved by the Security Council in the programme of work for this month. Our delegation would be extremely grateful to you if you could explain what specifically are we intending to discuss at today's meeting and who was behind the invitation. Thank you.
Representative of Sweden has asked for the floor. You have the floor, please.
I didn't ask for the floor.
The representative of France has asked for the floor. You have the floor, please.
I'm happy to speak, but that's for sure.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, France and 6 other members of the Council asked for this briefing. It is for methodological reasons and for reasons of substance. For methodology reasons, firstly, to respond, our Council needs to have all necessary information to understand the crises that it's examining, including those pertaining to human rights. And this is particularly the case in Syria. We are all well aware the human rights dimension cannot be dissociated from the dynamic of the conflict since the conflict's origin. There have been other Human Rights Commissioner briefings on issues that are on the Security Council's agenda, and Syria cannot and must not be an exception to this. This leads me to the substantial issues that motivates our collective request. On Syria in particular, the last briefing of the High Commissioner, Navi Pillay, dates back to 2014. Human rights are a fundamental aspect of the crisis that is no longer dealt with in the Council, has not been since then. Human rights violations are at the very origin of the conflict, at the origin of its worsening, to the detriment of international peace and security. This briefing that we really want will complement what we've looked at on the humanitarian situation, the chemical situation, and the political situation in Syria. Mr. President, perhaps we are in denial. We are lacking in realism in our approach to the Syrian conflict and any possible solutions. If we do not deal with this conflict pertaining to the human rights aspect of it, who can understand this? The regime, but also other parties, Daesh in particular. We see that violations are not just a simple consequence of the conflict, but actually a weapon that is deliberately used to control populations and territories. Finally, Mr. President, human rights cannot be dissociated from a political solution to the conflict. If the Council wants to engage in good faith to avoid the repetition of the same atrocities, it must contribute to a political solution based on an inclusive Syrian society with all its component parts and institutions that respect the fundamental rights and freedoms of all Syrian people. For all of these reasons, Mr. President, along with others, France has asked for this meeting to be held and would urge all members of this Council to speak in favour of the meeting being held. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement. Again, I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Russian Federation is opposed to holding today's briefing, and we swiftly informed colleagues about this on Friday, the 16th of March. We do not see any justification for this meeting, since human rights is not a subject on the agenda of the Security Council. In Geneva, there is the Human Rights Council working, and the very presence of Mr. Rad Al-Hussein in New York is not a convincing reason as to why he should speak and brief the Security Council, just the fact that he is here. As I understand, the delegation of France has already explained us the background to this meeting and have other delegations as well. And we would like to hear about how the Syrians, as they call it, regime, are violating the rights of the populations. And once again, reference made to the regime and not to the extremists who they openly support and who are holding the population of Syria in fear 8 years now. This really confirms our concerns about the very politicized nature of this initiative that has nothing whatsoever to do with concern for Syrians themselves. We would also like to ask the Secretariat to explain what was the reason for disseminating a OHCHR note on Syria among delegations. We did not request such information. There's no system in place for different UN bodies to send the Security Council whatever they want. We consider that the Secretariat was trying to assist those delegations that wanted to request this meeting, and this is running counter to the competencies of this main body of the Security Council of the United Nations. In such circumstances, we believe that there is a need to cancel this briefing, and we are going to have to ask the distinguished president to put this situation to a procedural vote. Thank you.
In view of the request of the Russian Federation and the comments made by members of the Council, I intend to put the provisional agenda to the vote. Accordingly, I shall put it to the vote now. Sorry, you still want the floor? First, to give the floor to the representative.
I would just like to explain, Mr. President, that as our agenda is stipulated, it is called the situation in the Middle East. Of course, we are not against the situation in the Middle East. What we are against is holding today's meeting in the format that it is being proposed. So I would like to ask you to put this to a vote appropriately. Thank you.
Distinguished representative of the U.S. has asked for the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States strongly supports the holding of today's session and urges all council members to support this procedural vote in favor of proceeding as planned today. The Russian Federation's continued efforts to obstruct the work of this council and obstruct its attention to grave and systemic human rights violations by its allies are appalling and should not be allowed to stand by this council. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, the UN Charter has clearly stipulated the functions and divisions of labor of all the main organs of the UN. The primary role of the Security Council is to maintain international peace and security, not to consider human rights issues. Pushing the Security Council into discussing human rights issues erodes the functions of other bodies of the UN. It will not truly help finding an effective solution to the issue either. China opposes that the Security Council deliberate specifically the human rights issue in Syria. Thank you, Mr. President.
Anyone else? I thank the representative of China for his statement. Could I ask the representative of the Russian Federation to clarify what he wants to be brought to the vote, if you want a procedural vote?
We are proposing voting upon whether the meeting should be held today or not. Whether the meeting should be held today or not. Of course, I believe, Mr. President, that you should put the issue of whether this meeting should be held today or not in principle should be put to the vote. We have not yet approved today's agenda for today's meeting. If we had approved it, then the meeting would indeed take place. But we have not yet approved today's agenda. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll try again. I would thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. In view of the request and the comments made by members of the Council, I intend to put the provisional agenda of today to the vote. Accordingly, I shall put it to the vote now. Will those in favor of the adoption of the provisional agenda today please raise their hand? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows: 8 votes in favor, 4 votes against, 3 abstentions. The provisional agenda has not been adopted, it having failed to obtain the required number of votes. The meeting is adjourned.